Good, then yes. We're good. Oh, we're good. Okay, well, here we are. Hey, so welcome. Hey, my name is Jake Williams. I'm the Executive Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence at Scythe. Now, Tim is up here as well. Tim won't be joining me today. Tim is actually at a different conference. We're live streaming for RSA. Tim is a Gartner and is basically kicking butt, taking names there. But I did want to give him credit here because he did indeed write several of these slides. Again, credit where credit's due. That said, let's get into the CTI update agenda, right? So we're talking today about cyber threat intelligence, and then very specifically, what are we at Scythe doing for cyber threat intelligence? I've been on at Scythe a whopping 2 months and a couple of days. What's today? So I guess 2 months and 4 days, right? Prior to me joining, we didn't have a formal CTI program, but wow, what a rockin' 2 months it has been, right? So I want to kind of walk through what are we doing? Why are we doing it, right? By the way, not to be put on the spot at all, but as I joined on April 4th, that was a Monday, on Friday, we were running Unicon, and they're like, hey, you can go close out Unicon and discuss your plans for, this job that we've never had before, and just let's walk through that. So I'm like, woohoo, right into the deep end, right? So now having 2 months behind me, I've got a better idea of what we're doing, where we're going. I want to explain a little bit of our methodology, right? Because I believe, one, in transparency, and then secondarily, it helps to understand a bit of what we can expect, coming down the road. Speaking of that, what's next, right? So what do we see coming down the road? So what are we doing, right? First and foremost, we are building a CTI program to go build the most realistic adversary emulation plans out there to help test your security controls. Now, folks, control validation without realism is a huge problem that we run into in the industry. A lot of times, folks, are effectively testing, a bulletproof vest, right, or ballistic armor by throwing paper airplanes at it, right? Now, I'm not going to say that if you throw a paper airplane at a ballistic vest and it doesn't pierce the ceramic plate there, that's bad body armor. But I will say you haven't tested the body armor, right? So the test didn't confirm anything. And at that point, then what are we doing? Why are we even running these tests? I'll tell you that more often than not, controls tested without realism fail spectacularly in the real world. The only people this is helping are incident responders and lawyers. Lawyers are always in the mix when we have a breach, and we would much prefer that we kind of move, I hate to use the word shift left, right? But that we move back towards validating our controls ahead of any of that occurring. So very quickly, as we talk about CTI, traditional CTI can really be broken down to 3 focus areas, right? Tactical, operational, and strategic. Tactical is a lot of indicators of compromise, IOCs, and a lot around how does the SOC operationalize, our Security Operations Center, operationalize those IOCs. The operational side, this is a lot of information sharing, campaign tracking, right? This is basically that oversight, if you will, for tactical a bit. I often refer to these folks as well as business bilingual. They can talk to the Security Operations Center folks. They can also speak the language of the folks doing strategic CTI. A lot of times in Security Ops Center world, I'm deep diving so far, right, that I'm so granular that I don't see the forest for the trees, right? These are the folks that go on the operational side, frequently doing attribution, right? And then we have strategic. This is your high-level trending data, executive reporting, the what-if kind of reports. And if I had to bucket Scythe in one of these areas, I would say that the Scythe CTI program is probably closest to tactical. But I want to be very clear. We're not creating an IOC feed, right? By the way, just really quickly here, most IOC feeds are absolutely worthless, right? So I want to go ahead and throw that out there. If you're paying for an IOC feed today, go back and challenge your team and say, show me how we're operationalizing this, right? And by and large, in my consulting over the years, the answer to that has been, we are not, right? Of course, at that point, then, we're just flushing money down the drain here. Done. Look, I'm outcome driven, right? And obviously we do adversary emulation. So at the end of the day, it's not about IOCs for me. It's about, can I emulate a particular threat actor procedure such that we can go and validate that our controls will catch that procedure. Not all IOCs can be directly emulated this way, right? So if I'm looking at a hash value, for instance, right? One of the things that we highlight in in Scythe. One of our big sales pitches, right, is, and this is not a sales pitch, by the way, one of our big sales pitches is that we're safe in production. Well, if I've got a hash value, right, of a piece of malware, what am I going to do to replicate that hash value? I mean, I could use our awesome virtual file system and download the malware onto your machines, but that doesn't sound very safe. Even if I didn't run it, that doesn't sound remotely safe. That sounds like, I don't know, putting like hand grenades at a daycare, right? You could kind of be like, well, don't worry, nobody's pulled the pin yet, but you wouldn't take your kids there. I wouldn't let that happen on my system either, right? So I can't emulate hashes. But there are lots of threat actor behaviors, right? And I want to be very clear about the threat actor behaviors, and we'll talk more about that later. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. That's what we're looking to be able to emulate to go test and validate our security controls. So why are we doing it? Adversary emulation, for validating security controls, this is the future. I'm talking to a lot of folks who are dealing with cyber insurance right now. Used to be cyber insurance was a one-page underwriting document, right? The questionnaire, it was like, check these 3 boxes. Do you have a vulnerability management program? And somebody would be like, yeah, I ran a vuln scanner one time. That was probably 3 years ago. Sure, I got a program. Yeah, that's good, right? And you check 2 other boxes and you get underwritten. And folks are finding out now that underwriting is not 2 or 3 questions. It is 20 or 30 pages of documents. Some of the stuff they're asking, do you have an EDR? If you don't have an EDR, you can't be underwritten. Okay, neat, right? But does the insurer really care that you have an EDR? Not really. They're using this as a heuristic. They're using this as shorthand for, right? Do we believe you'll be able to stop a particular type of threat? Now, me and Bryson 2 days ago, 2 very long days ago now, had a fireside chat where we discussed some security controls and where a number of these security controls fail. And we even talked about EDRs as one of the overhyped, at least in my mind, overhyped security controls. Now, let me be super clear. You need EDR. You absolutely need EDR. Please don't take this as, I'm going to go and uninstall EDR. It has to be tuned appropriately, though. And in far too many organizations, we don't see it tuned at all. There's no detection engineering done. And as a result, threat actors are able to go bypass those EDRs. Now, they're not bypassing the actual EDR technology, right? They are capitalizing on the exclusions that you've put in place, right? In order to make that EDR run in your environment. So when I talk about insurers and underwriters, right, they don't care about the letters EDR. They care about the capability that it promises. And this is really where security control validation comes in, right? Adversary emulation comes in, because far too many security teams, they have foundational confusion about what their controls will and won't detect. For those that know me, you probably know that I come out of an incident response background prior to joining Scythe. I've done a lot of incident response, been there, done that, have the proverbial t-shirt, a whole drawer of those t-shirts, unfortunately. I can tell you that very often as we go into an incident, we find folks come back and they're like, that's not what happened. And I'm like, forensics doesn't lie, my friend. We do know what happened, right? And they say, well, no, because we have this security control or that security control that definitely blocked X, Y, or Z, right? And I'm like, okay, neat, right? Great that you have that security control, but I'm telling you foundationally, it didn't block that thing. Where's the disconnect? It's adversary emulation. We're not actually testing our controls in any realistic fashion. We think we are, right? But in fact, we're not, because again, we don't have that realism component. We're not doing the same procedures, executing the same procedures that real threat actors do. Now, this is a spot where I've got to give, well, first Tim and then Johnny some credit here. I absolutely love this meme. The good old pew pew map, the 4K pew pew map, right? And so, of course, while the SOC lead's staring at that, Security Operations Center lead's staring at that, people have completely noticed or forgotten the junior threat analyst who has completely missed and said, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and say, yeah, let that Mimi Cats go. I worked this incident, right, repeatedly. I've worked this incident repeatedly, right? It was even worse in one case where it was a managed security operations center. So somebody they were paying to do that work basically ignored a bunch of alarms and, ignored. They didn't ignore, they tuned out those alarms because they were false positives. By the way, the false positives were the threat actor failing again and again and again. By the way, we're going to talk about this because they failed at individual procedures. They had a technique that they wanted to use, and that was credential dumping. And they have dozens of procedures. I think as me and Bryson chatted about this the other day, I was like, how many procedures can you think of? We We don't know the number there. I haven't thought about like and written down the number of variants, but it's got to be in the dozens, right? And so the threat actor kept executing procedures until one worked. Now, what the SOC analysts saw was they're like, oh, well, here we are. I keep seeing a bunch of these flagged, but there's nothing there, right? And so then they just dismissed those alarms outright, went into the EDR, clicked a particular box for that system. A couple weeks later, by the way, big international company, a couple weeks later, they had a big ransomware event and shut down plants on 2 continents, right? So manufacturing plants on 2 continents. As you can imagine, that was not a great day for the Security Operations Center lead or the SOC analyst. There were definitely lawyers involved in that one. Woo-hoo-hoo, right? But hey, separately, you got to step back for a minute and think about how did that CISO look, or what does that CISO think, right, at that point? Because the reality is they just didn't cover the procedures, right, that a threat actor was going to use, right? So what's our solution here? It's realistic testing backed by CTI, right? So this is a big quality over quantity thing, right? So I'm a big fan of running a smaller number of quality tests rather than a large number of, let's call them worthless or ish tests, right? We were talking, me and Bryson were chatting here, gosh, it's probably been a month ago, and talking about the ability to go replay packet capture, right? And how so many folks look at that as adversary, like that's the beginning and the end of adversary emulation. That's neat. By all means, go replay packet capture. That's great. You can check one particular type of control in the network, completely forgetting about the endpoint. That seems like a really bad plan, right? I want both. I want endpoint and network detections tested, right? So we need to be able to go build payloads dynamically as well. We know that endpoint detection is a beast. We also know that some procedures that we execute may get caught if they're run through a standalone executable. But if I run one, let's say through a DLL using run DLL 32 or reg server 32, you name it, or injecting that DLL into another process, now that procedure gets through. Sometimes that gets caught, but I can inject shellcode or use a beacon object file, a BOF, right? And now the same procedure doesn't get caught, right? So now we obviously look at that as a variation of said procedure, right? If I'm doing it for an executable versus BOF, but the outcome ends up being the same. So we need to be able to test in the ways that our threat actors do. By the way, if this whole beacon object file or inline assembly or any of that doesn't make sense, rock on, that's okay, as it turns out. That's one of the many reasons, right, that Scythe is a force multiplier for you and your security teams. You don't have to understand this stuff. In fact, I had a good friend, a CISO at a, I'll leave out which company, doesn't matter. I was up in the Scythe booth here yesterday afternoon. I was walking him through the platform, and he's like, yeah, this is beyond me. He's like, I got to be honest, I tell you, I don't think a lot of my red team folks can do this. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't really matter, man. I mean, it does, right? It would be nice if everybody could, but that's why this platform exists. And so that you can do adversary emulation without needing to have a team that foundationally understands every piece of how a threat actor works. That's my job. Right, I'm going to put this stuff together, right, and put these emulation plans, these adversary emulation plans together using the same procedures that we're seeing real threat actors use. And so then you can turn around and run those without needing to know all the technical details. Right now, if you want to know the technical details, don't worry. We've got people that will absolutely work with you on those. Right, but good news is you don't actually have to understand that. We can help you abstract that away. And now we're down to the lowest common denominator. I've used the joke. Not really much of a joke, but I've noted several times here that, my mom, who can brick a phone from 30 feet away by looking at it wrong, she can run this platform to security control validation, right? It really is that easy. But moving forward here, right? We've all heard about attack. I love attack. I absolutely do. I want to be super clear. Every time we talk about attack, I've got to be super clear. I don't want to talk bad about MITRE. I don't want this to come across as I'm talking bad about MITRE. Absolutely not. I love MITRE for everything that they do. But let's be very clear. Attack operates at a technique level. You cannot emulate a technique. We'll get into this in just a second here about the why, but you cannot emulate a technique. If I want to do adversary emulation, it has to be at the procedure level. So I've got that problem first and foremost. My second problem that I bump into, though, when we get into attack and the whole technique classification side here, it really is a taxonomy. All right, it was designed to be a taxonomy. We'll talk more about that as well. But folks, I can't learn how to do adversary emulation through attack or through attack testing. any more than I can learn English by reading a dictionary, right? Sure, there's some words in there. Sure, I can put some of those words together and honestly probably make some pretty nonsensical sentences. Right? I'm not going to say that throwing a bunch of attack techniques together and picking random procedures gives you some pretty unrealistic adversary emulation plans. It so does, right? But anyway, right? So attack, this underpins so much of our testing today, right? And I got to tell you, the attack testing, as much as I love it, how many emails did you get over the last couple of months, right? When vendors are like, want to let you know we scored 100% on the attack evaluation criteria. And I'm like, great, right? So that sounds really impressive until you learn that everybody, and I don't mean this like I rarely talk in absolutes. Everybody who was evaluated in the attack framework criteria this year and the attack evaluations, everybody scored 100%. I'm not saying that people are gaming the system, right? They totally are. I mean, just let's be real, right? So the system is being gamed. Now, that's not to say that these evaluations are worthless, right? They do tell us something. We know, based on the attack evaluation criteria, the very, very specific criteria, which, by the way, were known to the vendors before they rolled into that, before they rolled into that evaluation. They know that you block exactly that. Well, that's great. That's one threat actor. That's one set of basically one emulation chain or one attack plan. Again, I love this idea, but that stops so short of what we really need for realistic, broad scope adversary emulation. Not to mention the fact that as we look at these individual vendors, right, who absolutely are, doing great testing here, right? That control, that security control, that EDR, your endpoint protection platform, whatever that is installed on a base operating system by itself. Folks, I've done tons of incident response. I've done tons of security consulting, security architecture work. You never have EDR installed by itself, right? It's part of a control ecosystem. And by the way, if you think for a minute that those tools don't bump against each other and, maybe I have an EDR by itself catches something, but when I install EDR plus my endpoint DLP plus my endpoint CASB, right? Suddenly that thing that got caught a minute ago doesn't, right? Because something got unhooked or I have another hook being added or you name it, right? By the way, again, if you don't know hooking, by all means, you don't have to. Again, we're kind of back to the whole, don't worry, we got you covered, right? But I do want to talk a little bit more about on the attack abstraction side. Attack was meant to be a means of communication. It is intentionally an abstraction, right? I like to kind of think about it almost like a very, very pixelated JPEG, right? You can kind of see, right? I don't necessarily know quite what that is, but I know what it's not, right? I mean, it could be an oil well on fire, right? It could be maybe just a campfire. It could be any number of things. I know it's not a blue whale, right? I know a lot of things that it's not, right? But I can't take that and effectively recreate the underlying picture from it. And I want you to think about attack like that, right? So attack is giving you some information about the basically about the overall threat actor. But at the end of the day, again, it's nothing that I can directly emulate. So again, want to highlight again that it was built as a means of communication, right? And this is, by the way, I've got to give Tim full credit for this. And I'll tell you that when I first saw this next set of slides here that I'm stealing from Tim, Tim Schultz, adversary emulation lead here, I got to tell you, I had chills, right? So I was out walking the dog, right? And, get the message in. It's like, hey, can you review the slide deck? And, and one of the peer reviewers on it. And I'm looking through this. I'm like, dude, this is in every presentation that we do, talking about techniques versus procedures going forward. People all the time ask me, Jake, how do I use MITRE ATT&CK to defend my network, right? And that's just, when somebody asks that question, they foundationally don't understand it, right? They just don't, because again, I come back to this is like saying, how do I learn English by reading the dictionary, right? With no other background, right? So let's talk quickly about process discovery, T1057. So process discovery, this, by the way, if you're not familiar with the T codes, these are individual codes that are used to describe a particular technique. Now, at a procedure level, how do I actually execute that to do process discovery? And by the way, process discovery is something that is so stupid simple. You would think there would be exactly one way or one code for this. I have task list. Well, I don't mean to be the wet blanket, but when you run task list, you're running that from the Windows command line, which, by the way, is a different T code, a different technique code. So now if I'm doing process enumeration with task lists, is it T1057 or T1059? The .003 is a sub-technique. Is it that? How else can we do this? Well, we call WMIC. WMIC, turns out that is also a command line tool, but using WMIC, we're using Windows Managed Instrumentation, which is itself a separate code. Then we have Get Process with PowerShell, which is also a command line tool. Could be. We have unmanaged PowerShell built into Scythe if you're into that kind of thing as well. So now we have 3 different codes that are not T1057 for different procedures. And by the way, I'm only scratching the surface here. Dare I mention, these all have atomic red team tests, right? Now, if you're not familiar with atomic red team, this is one of these things people tell us a lot. They're like, Jake, we use atomic red team to go and test our security controls. I love it. What does the atomic and atomic red team mean? It certainly doesn't mean, on the atomic red team side, it certainly doesn't mean nuclear, or atomic means one thing, an atom, right? So not a chain. Look, my friends, threat actors, I used to be a threat actor for those that don't know, right? Threat actors do not execute a single atomic procedure. They just don't, right? They work in chains, right? So they're chaining these procedures together to achieve an outcome, right? Well, okay, so I have these atomic tests. And by the way, I love Atomic Red Team. We have a ton of that stuff built into Scythe, as well as we have numerous folks on Scythe staff who are frequent contributors back to Atomic Red Team, right? So giving back to the community, it's a great it's a great platform. That said, the number of people who have tried and failed to run even some of the basic Atomic Red Team tests, right? If you tried to do this, you know it's not just a plug and play and go thing, right? Forgetting the fact that it's not covering everything that I need here, right? There I mentioned too, by the way, that there's a lot of stuff, and I only scratched the surface. I say Tim has only scratched the surface here. We have lots of other procedures, right? And by the way, here is create tool help 32 snapshot function. That's a native Windows API. And it turns out there's no Atomic Red Team test for that, right? So I want to highlight here really where we're falling down on the techniques versus procedures. Because if you come to me and you're like, Jake, I want to emulate process discovery T1057. I'm showing you here on the slide that not only do I have a minimum of 4 different procedures, right? And by the way, it's not 4, it's like 40 or 400, right? Different procedures. They themselves have different attack codes, right? And so if I'm tracking just a bunch of technique level codes, wow, that's going to get complicated really, really fast, right? So I want to talk quickly about the pyramid of pain, right? Most folks have seen this. David Bianco put this together a number of years ago. I'm not going to highlight too much around this other than to note that up here at the top, TTPs, right? Threat actors will absolutely change out hash values, IP addresses, domain names very, very easily. Tools are a little bit more difficult, but I can tell you from a threat actor standpoint, those habits die hard, right? So you put me on any implant, any threat actor framework, whatever that happens to be, I'm going to generally execute with the same operational methodology in post-exploitation activity, right? And that's where the procedures are going to come in. Now, Chris Peacock, another one of our fine folks over at Scythe, put together what he calls the TTP pyramid. And I got to tell you, this was something that I was unaware of prior to joining Scythe. Wow. This is my go-to for explaining TTPs to people. I've struggled, to be honest, I've struggled over the years to explain the difference between a tactic, technique, and a procedure. Chris does it fantastically. I've got the link here. Of course, you can go find that on the Scythe blog. But he does a really, really good job of highlighting why it's procedures that we really need to look at. And then what is the difference between a procedure and a technique? And then, of course, even a tactic. I need not deep dive into this. We've already highlighted the fact that, again, the only thing I can emulate are procedures, right? So if I can't emulate it, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. It definitely does. There's a reason for the abstraction. There are lots of folks that need to talk at that abstraction layer, right? As I describe the overall goals of an operation, I should be talking at a higher level of abstraction and then let the operator figure out the procedures that will best accomplish that goal, right? But for us, what we need to focus on from a control validation standpoint is procedures. So I want to quickly talk about some of the fails that we've seen over the years as we think about with procedures, even something as simple as signature-based testing. Now, for those that aren't following here, the CMD/C, this actually is running a command prompt before we run sketch tasks. This itself, my friends, is an evasion. All right, so I've actually seen this used as an evasion where running sketch tasks by itself, you absolutely get caught and you do CMD/C and you don't get caught. Why? Well, it turns out, again, folks are signaturing on very, very specific things, right? They're very, very brittle. Our signatures are very, very brittle and very, very easy to go and bypass, right? So we can build a very brittle detection for this where we look for maybe task 1. Well, okay, but a threat actor can change that trivially, change to task 2, task 3, etc. They could move it to a different executable, right? We've seen this before, right? And in fact, we can take a trip down memory lane with good old signature-based antivirus. Now, I'm not comparing this outright to signature-based AV. Obviously, right? Obviously this is better, but not good enough, right? So what do we really want to highlight on? Well, for this particular technique, it's sketch tasks with a create. I don't want to say I don't care, but generally most of the use of sketch tasks from a threat actor standpoint isn't that interesting to me. When they create a new task, I know they could be doing lateral movement. I know they could be doing persistence, right? They could be doing any number of other operations around it, but I know it's a very common technique that they're going to use. So I want to highlight on the create. Now, we're not done, by the way, right? This is a procedure, right? And if I'm using sketch task for lateral movement, is a procedure that accomplishes lateral movement. I'm using it for persistence. It's a procedure for persistence. There are, by the way, dozens of ways to create scheduled tasks. There's a native Windows API for that. There's PowerShell for that, right? Do I run PowerShell from the command line? Do I do it through unmanaged PowerShell in memory, right? So there's a lot of stuff that I can do here. But what I need is, and I hope I'm highlighting as I talk about the many, many variations of this, I hope I'm highlighting the need for repeatable testing. That's first and foremost. And this is a big theme that we've talked about a lot. We talk about other customers. We talked about in the fireside chat. You need to be able to repeat the tests again and again consistently, because as we tune our EDR, as we tune our endpoint protection, we need to be able to look and identify that as we tuned something in and I've got a new alarm source, did that take something existing out? And folks, if you don't have a way to do this in a very methodical, repeatable manner, you don't have the staff to be able to scale back to say, okay, well, I made a change to this variable, and now I'm getting a detection. Did I drop any of the other detections, any of the other 300 detections that I already have in play? The answer very often, unfortunately, is yes. Now, incident responders paid by the hour, they love this, right? But you don't, right? You want to be able to go back and validate every time you make a change. I also talk to folks that are big in configuration management, thinking about vulnerability management and patching, and I'll talk to them and they're like, yeah, we got to test those patches in a lab environment for at least 4 days or a week before we can apply them in production. And I'm like, oh, neat. And so why do you do that? And they're like, well, we never know if it's going to cause an issue. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. How often do your EDR signatures update? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, hourly, right? Hourly is the answer there, right? Automatically hourly. And I'm like, how often are you retesting those? And they're like, oh, yeah. And then I talk to folks and they're like, yeah, we just validated the agent updated, not a signature update, the full agent update. We were from a 3.1 to a 3.2. And yeah, we tested that in the lab for a week. I'm like, what'd you test? So we just wanted to see if it was going to cause any problems with Office or our third-party app that we use. I'm like, and then you validated all the detections still work in the new agent, right? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, if I had to pick is it going to cause some kind of business interruption, whatever, or is it going to open me wide open to, by the way, wide open to threats that I thought I had blocked, that I maybe even have validated previously that I have blocked? I'll take the business interruption. I want to be very clear on this. I don't mean widespread, wide-scale business interruption. One is very visible. If I install the updated agent, right, and we go from 3.1 to 3.2, and suddenly Outlook stops working, brother, the help desk is going to let me know, and we are going to roll that back immediately, right? But if I update from 3.1 to 3.2, and suddenly a threat actor can, accomplish some procedure or successfully execute a procedure they couldn't before, my first understanding of that may be Krebs calling me or CNN calling for comment, right? So you've had a breach, right? Hey, your data's for sale on the dark web, right? Do you have a comment, right? And the comment there is maybe we should have tested more, right? Anyway, just throwing that out there. You need to be able to not create brittle detections. By the way, too, from a time perspective, I understand why people create the brittle detections. They don't have the staff to go in and create and test better detections, right? By the way, if you're going to move away from brittle detection, you probably need more detections, right? So at the end of the day, unfortunately. So talked a lot about behavior-based testing. Let's come back to how are we building out this CTI program? First off, we're partnering with, basically partnering with organizations to obtain procedure level data. We have some partners that are helping us communicate intrusion data. Obviously, this comes under NDA. And so if you are an incident response firm who does lots of incident response, or you are somebody who does lots of internal investigations, you want to share some of these attack chains with us, let's talk. Certainly we can work something out there. We also get analysis of public reporting. Red team operators. Turns out that we have some really, really good red teamers, including some folks that are indeed former threat actors themselves. And so by understanding how threat actors work, we can help build chains there as well. We're deploying high interaction honeypots. I know that lots of folks are like, honeypot? Absolutely not. That's ridiculous, right? A threat actor will definitely know they're in a honeypot. Okay, sure. Cool guy that read about it in a book, right? Let me go ahead and tell you that's not the case, right? It's not always the case. And just to throw this out here, by the time you know you're in a honeypot, it's too late, right? You've already given up some of the game. Now, some folks are like, yeah, but Jake, what if the threat actor figures out they're in a honeypot and then you only see 10 of the 30 techniques, the first 10, I said technique, swear jar procedures, you only saw 10 of the 30 procedures, right, that the threat actor is going to emulate, or the threat actor is going to execute. Okay, if I can emulate those first 10, right, I'm not saying I don't care about the last 20, but wow, that sure is better than the 0 that we had before. So I'm all about the high interaction honeypot side. And then, of course, industry sharing groups, right? There are a number of ISACs that we are partnering with as well. If you want to contribute data to Scythe, if you want to talk about how we're doing that data sharing or how we're building data sharing arrangements, come talk to me. I'm obviously at RSA. I'll be at Black Hat and DEF CON, and I would suspect most major industry conferences going forward. Yes, I mean, not that I haven't been up to this point anyway, but also here's my email, right? So please don't spam me. If there's if you want to get a data sharing agreement or something in place there, certainly be open to chat. So what's next? Currently, and for the last couple of years, I got to give George Orchias, a lot of credit here. He started Threat Thursday. He's our CTO. He started Threat Thursday when he joined Scythe. Threat Thursday is fantastic. I love this. It's not only an emulation plan, it also has detection documentation. We're not giving that up going forward. We will definitely still be publishing a Threat Thursday every month so that our customers get an emulation plan every month. Love it. But we are going a little bit further. We are continuing work on a procedure level sharing standard. All right. So as I came into Scythe, 4 days into the job, closing out Unicon, I talked about the need for the procedure level standard. We share a lot of data today. Unfortunately, we're sharing at a technique level and not at a procedure level. Again, this is suboptimal for emulation. Right? Now, we are also going to be offering CTI subscriptions, more frequent adversary emulation plan releases for those with CTI subscriptions. So instead of one a month, right, it'll be significantly more than that. I'm guessing something in the neighborhood of one a week. You'll also have emulation plans on breaking threats, right? So if you're following along, with kind of the evolution of Scythe, what we've seen coming forward here, is that things like the F5 vulnerability, right? We did post-exploitation emulation for that. Within hours of us seeing the first exploitation in the wild. Felina, we did a lot of work on that and had emulation plans. That actually broke on a Saturday over the Memorial Day weekend. A lot of people were blissfully, unfortunately not me, but a lot of people were blissfully unaware this is occurring. Over their weekend, rolled back in Tuesday morning to find out there's an O-Day, or maybe not an O-Day, depending on whether or not you listen to Microsoft. But regardless, threat actors are actively exploiting this in the wild. In fact, it was discovered through active exploitation in the wild, there's already an emulation plan ready to go. And so we got lots of feedback from customers, who are like, oh my gosh, like we were immediately able to know, are we vulnerable? Are we not? See, vulnerable. Everybody's vulnerable. There's still no patch. Basically, once we implement that mitigation, right, is that mitigation successful, right? Will I detect this with my control framework? That's the kind of stuff we're going to be doing a lot more of with folks. We'll also, likely offer bespoke emulation plans based on organization-specific needs. So if you have something very custom that you want, again, that's professional services, and certainly through CTI, we'll be there for you. And then also working on some general CTI sharing. As I mentioned before, we really are focusing on a very niche area of CTI at Scythe, because that's where it matters for adversary emulation. We also recognize, that among our customers, one of the things that we bump into in CTI, obviously, is I want to share intelligence. I want to share information that's going to help make the community better. There's some stuff I can share very, very publicly, and there's other stuff that if I share it publicly, the threat actor is going to use it. Like there's a counterintelligence concern. If they know that I know, they're going to zig and zag, and that's going to be good for nobody. And so we'll be standing up some private threat intel sharing channels for our CTI customers as well, so that they can trade with pre-vetted partners, right? One of the problems with sharing is like, can I trust that individual? But again, we've already obviously vetted our customers. And so again, we'll set up some channels there as well. That of course benefits everybody here. As I'm sharing CTI with my team, you'll be seeing that as well. And that's at the higher, more general level. But on the procedure level, we know going forward, we're gonna see a lot more adversary emulation plans and a lot more on breaking threats, which honestly is where the rubber meets the road. So folks, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for attending today. And with that, peace out. Okay. Thanks.